Good morning. Thank you for joining us again as we continue our study of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Today is Jesus brought before Herod Antipas. The Sanhedrin had been trying for a long time now to put Jesus to death, but because of Jesus' popularity with the people, they feared to do so openly. Now, you got to remember the Sanhedrin, they are made up of Pharisees and Sadducees, and the Sadducees did not believe in miracles or the supernatural. So, all of the miracles and supernatural things in the Old Testament, they explained away as being myth or legend, okay? So when Jesus began to do miracles and show supernatural things, he was on their radar immediately. And they did not like this because they were totally disbelieving of the supernatural. Also, Jesus, he taught with an authority and a passion that had never been seen before. And so he was a favorite with the people, and they didn't like that. Jesus, he opposed them so many times on their interpretation of law. You got to remember, the priests, scribes, sages, all of them that were teaching at that time, they were teaching from the Shamash, okay, which is the interpretation over time, down through the years, the interpretation of sages, priests, rabbis, okay, their interpretation of the tonics, okay, not actually the tonics itself, but the interpretations had become more important than the Torah and all the books of the writings and the prophets and all of that. Their interpretations had taken place over that. And that's why you see Jesus many times, he says, "You have heard it said, but I say unto you." You have heard it said was their interpretation of law. When Jesus said, "But I say unto you," he was saying this is the way it should have been. This is what it actually means. And who better to tell us what God meant through the laws and the prophets and teachers back then, of the writings, of the poetry, of all the books of the Bible? Who better to tell us what they mean than the Son of God, who was there when they were written, okay? So they just really hated Jesus. I mean, they had this playhouse of religion, and Jesus was coming in and just wrecking it, okay? So they had been trying now, ever since the beginning of his ministry, to do away with him, to disprove him first. When that wasn't working, then they wanted to put him to death. Okay, so Pontius Pilate is who they had brought him before, and our scripture text today is going to be Luke 23, 4 through 12. Pontius Pilate, I'm going to go back and explain a little bit of what we've talked about here in the past. He had been promoted by Rome to be governor of Judea. Pontius Pilate was a brutal governor. He was not afraid of shedding the innocent blood of Jews, guilty or innocent. Pilate usually stayed away from Jerusalem because he hated the Jews and their pious religious leaders. So usually he stayed at Caesarea and allowed the Sanhedrin court, which was led by Caiaphas, to take care of legal matters and to keep order. Pilate, however, was under the scrutiny of Rome because of numerous complaints that had been lodged against him. So during the high holy days of Judaism, he forced himself to come to Jerusalem and stay at the Tower of Antonius in order to make sure law and order was kept. The last thing he needed was for Rome to have another complaint about the way he governed Judea, because he knew that if he continued to have complaints, they were going to exile him to Gaul, and that is not a place you wanted to be. Matthew 12:34 and Matthew 23:33 records that Jesus had called the Sanhedrin vipers, and they showed themselves true to this by hatching up a plan that could rid themselves of both Pilate and Jesus. And first they arrested Jesus there in the garden, brought him to be tried on false charges. After they had convicted him, sentenced him to death, beaten him, mocked him, ridiculed him, just tortured him for, I don't know, probably 6 to 8 hours. They took him to Pilate and then falsified charges that Jesus had encouraged the people to not pay taxes and that Jesus had claimed to be a king whom Rome had not appointed. They knew if Pilate sentenced Jesus to death, then in the eyes of the people they would not be held accountable. And if the people revolted, Rome would probably get rid of Pilate and take care of both their problems for them. If the people didn't revolt, they would at least get rid of Jesus, if nothing else. If Pilate didn't put Jesus to death, he would be shown to be in league with a traitor, and Rome would banish Pilate or put him to death. And during the chaos, the Sanhedrin then would have Jesus stoned for blasphemy, for claiming to be the Son of God. Either way, they would get rid of two problems at once. They truly showed their conniving strategy of vipers, okay? The solution for Pilate was simple. Crucify Jesus and keep the people under control. But Matthew 24:14 tells us that Jesus never spoke out in his own defense and for the most part kept silent. And Pilate marveled greatly at Jesus' silence. And we talked about this last week. Marveled greatly. The Greek word was thaumazoleon, filled with exceeding wonder and awe. So there was just something about this man that Pilate could make himself sentence him to death. So Pilate begins looking for a loophole. And that's where we left off last week. Luke 23:4. Then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in this man. Pilate saw no reason to continue with this charade. He had no desire to sentence Jesus to death. John's writings tells us that the Sanhedrin council would not enter into the Tower of Antonio, or they would have been considered defiled and not able to partake of the Passover. Okay, this was a heathen place as far as they were concerned. This was a Gentile. Pilate was a Gentile. He was not a Jew. Okay, he was appointed by Rome. So if they went into the Tower of Antonia where he was staying, they would be considered unclean, and then a lengthy cleansing ritual had to take place before they would have been able to attend the Passover. And by the time they had fulfilled all the rituals of this cleansing, the Passover would have been over with. So they wouldn't even go inside. Okay, this meant that they were standing outside, and Pilate had to go back and forth between the judgment hall where Jesus was and the outside where the Sanhedrin council stood. It was early morning, and Pilate was probably just getting tired of this ordeal. He hated the Jews already. And then their disdain they were showing that wouldn't he come into his palace there? I imagine he was getting pretty upset. Okay, and so it says, then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, I find no fault in him. The word people here is the Greek word oklos, and it means borne along by the rabble or riot. The normal word for people is laos, okay, which means general populace. Luke uses the word oklos to indicate this group had grown to many more than just the Sanhedrin. They had become riotous. Now, the Sanhedrin most likely had induced more rabble-rousers into the crowd to purposely get Pilate's attention, because they knew that he could not afford to have another uprising, that Rome would not look favorable on him. Luke 23:5. And they were the more fierce, saying, he stirred up the people, teaching throughout all Jewry, beginning from Galilee to this place. More fierce, the Greek word epashio, to insist to the point of riot. So they were saying that they were insisting to the point of rioting, okay, that Jesus had been stirring up the people from all the way from Galilee there to Jerusalem. Every Jew, he had been stirring them up. Luke 23:6, when Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether this man were a Galilean. Luke 23:7. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at that time. When Pilate heard Jesus was a Galilean, he knew he had found the loophole out of this mess. Herod Antipas, who was Rome's appointed ruler over Galilee, was in town for the Passover. What luck! He could send this mob to Herod and be done with it. Whatever Herod ruled, Pilate himself would no longer be responsible, since Herod had jurisdiction over Galileans. Luke 23:8. And when Herod saw Jesus, and this was pretty close, this where Herod was staying, and in the palace of his dad, Herod the Great, this was only probably half a mile, maybe a mile between there and the Tower of Antonius, where Pilate was staying. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he was desirous to see him for a long season, because he had heard of many things of him, and hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Herod Antipas was also a ruthless ruler. Rome had appointed him as tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. When his father Herod the Great had died, Rome had been divided up. We talked about this several lessons ago. Rome had been divided up. Rome had divided up Herod the Great's kingdom, which Herod the Great had been over Galilee, Judea, and Samaria all, plus Perea, all the surrounding, Idunium, all the surrounding areas. He was over it all, okay? But they divided it all up whenever he died, and Pilate had managed to be assigned to 1/3 of that kingdom. And Herod Antipas had become furious, because he wanted Judea and Samaria for himself, and all he was given was Galilee and Perea, okay? So he wanted the whole ball of wax, and he was angry when Pilate, actually it was even before Pilate, the ones that were assigned over those territories. They had been bitter enemies ever since. Herod had heard about Jesus and his miracle-working ability, and had desired to meet him, even though many of the miracles Jesus had performed were in and around Capernaum of Galilee. Herod had never met Jesus, and that's kind of odd, because this was Herod's area. He ruled Galilee, okay, and that's where Jesus was staying, was Capernaum of Galilee. It's where his ministry headquarters had become. So Herod would have heard a lot about him, but for some reason he had never met him. All right, so let's break this verse down. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad. The Greek word is leon kairo, and it means extreme excitement, emotionally euphoric. Okay, this would indicate that Herod was jumping up and down with joy, at least inside of himself. He was jumping for joy at finally getting to meet Jesus, for he was desirous to see him of a long season. Desirous is the Greek word thelo, very strongly wished or desired. A long season is the Greek word hekanos, very long time. So he had had a very strong wish or desire for a very long period of time to meet Jesus. Why? Because he had heard many things of him. Jesus' fame was throughout Galilee. He was known as the miracle man by many. Not only this, but Herod Antipas would have known of his father Herod the Great's attempts to kill the baby Jesus. His father had probably told Antipas of the Magi coming and calling Jesus the King of the Jews, and about the supernatural star that the Magi had followed. I mean, Antipas and probably every member of the Herod house had heard these stories of Jesus' supernatural birth. So even everybody wanted to meet him. All of these, why would they not want to meet the man that Herod the Great had said got out of his fingers? I mean, he had got away, and I'm sure that up to the time of his death, he was still probably trying to seek Jesus to kill him. So anyway, Antipas wanted to meet him. Herod the Great wanted to meet him in order to kill him. But Antipas wanted to meet him for a different reason. What was that reason? And hoped to have some miracle done by him. Why was Herod excited to meet Jesus? Because Jesus was known as the man who worked miracles, and Herod was hoping that Jesus would entertain him by working a miracle or supernatural event for him. Herod didn't care that Jesus was helping people. Herod simply wanted to be entertained as he would have with a great magician. Luke 23:9. Then he questioned with him in many words, but he, Jesus, answered him nothing. To Herod's dismay, Jesus refused to perform on demand, and when Herod questioned Jesus about the events of his life, Jesus would not answer. Luke 23:10. And the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. When Jesus would not perform or answer questions directed at him, the chief priests and the scribes took the opportunity to turn Herod's palace into a courtroom. They began to judge Jesus, hurling accusation after accusation at him. Luke uses the words vehemently, which the Greek word is eutonos, and it means intensely or at full volume. They yelled accusations at Jesus, probably such things as, he's a fraud, he's not a miracle worker, he's just a charlatan. There's no telling what all they were yelling. They did so, screaming uncontrollably, verbally insulting Jesus with their venomous words. Luke 23:11. And Herod, with his men of war, set him at naught, and mocked him, and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him again to Pilate. Men of war is the Greek word stratimena, and it means a detachment of Roman soldiers. This detachment of Roman soldiers was assigned to protect Herod. So, set him at naught is the Greek word extotheno, and it means to make one to be nothing, to make light of, to belittle, to disdain, to disregard, despise, or treat with malice and contempt. These men were violently screaming insults at Jesus, tearing him to shreds with their words. It says they mocked him, the Greek word ampadzio, to jeer, to deride, and make a game of it by impersonation. Arrayed him is the Greek word parabello, and it means to throw or drape around. So they were making fun of him, they were jeering at him, they were deriding him, they were just belittling him, and they decided to make a game of it here now. So they arrayed him with a gorgeous robe, esteme tamapre, esteme tampran, okay, a garment made of sumptuous, brightly colored, resplendent material. Being in Herod's palace, the soldiers would have had access to several persons' costly wardrobes. Kings had been staying here. High people of the state. So there would have been a lot of wardrobe there, rich wardrobe. So Herod and his soldiers decided to make a game, since Jesus wouldn't answer, wouldn't entertain them. They decided to make a game of this, mocking and jeering at Jesus, even draping a gorgeous robe that was of costly material around Jesus' shoulders, and then they sent him back to Pilate. By doing this, Herod was saying, this man is no king. He's just a nobody, just a pretender. That's what basically Herod was saying. He decided since Jesus wouldn't entertain him, he would get his own entertainment. So he allowed his soldiers to just mock and make fun of, and finally put this robe on Jesus and just make fun of him. Okay? Luke 23:12. And the same day Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before they were at enmity between themselves. Where they once were bitter enemies, they found common ground here, because neither wanted to put Jesus to death, although they didn't have a problem with mocking and belittling Jesus. In order to satisfy, for Herod, in order to get some entertainment. In Pilate's case, to get the Sanhedrin council that he loathed off his back, okay? So Herod after he did what he could to get entertainment out of Jesus, he sends him back to Pilate. Okay, so we'll pick up there next week. God bless you this week. May God add His blessing to this reading of His Word. Go with God. Have a great week, and just check in again next week as we continue this. Thank you.